Very good morning to one and all. Today we have gathered here for a very interesting discussion, which is on unleashing enterprise value. But before we start off with anything further about the session, let me request all to place their hands on their heart for the ICI motto song.
य एष सुप्तेषु जाग्रति य एष सुप्तेषु जाग्रति कामं 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 कामपुरुषो पुरुषो निर्विमाणः निर्विमाणः तदेव शुक्रं तद्ब्रह्मा तद्ब्रह्मा तदेवामृतमुच्यते तस्मिन् लोकः शतः सर्वे तदूनात्यपि कश्चन एतद्द्वैता 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 एतद्द्वैता.
So I recognize the presence of our chairman Manish Gadia here. Faculty for the day, Asit Mehta, a very renowned, and learned person in this field. Murtuza Kachwala, my regional council colleague and secretary last year. Today we have all gathered here for this very interesting discussion about, how do you build enterprise value for your clients or for your own businesses, because often in the phase of executing the business, people lose vision about where is the value. Maybe sometimes the value is lost and you spend all the time in just continuing to do your business without realizing that there's no accreting value to this business. So we have this very good session today here. And before we start off, and I request Manish Bhai to give his address, may I update you on one more, initiative that we have started at WRC. That is, we have started with a coach portal, which is for women chartered accountants. They can register themselves there if they are looking to some jobs or change of jobs. They can register there, and even the employers members can register there and look for job seekers. And if they find somebody suitable, a suitable candidate on that portal, a request will be sent out by way of a mail, and then the employer and the job seeker can take it forward. So this is one initiative which is started at WRC platform, and we request all of you to take advantage of this portal. And the other thing that we have for the benefit of members is the charity help desk. Now we know that there is re-registration required for charitable organization, and there are several issues that people are facing in re-registering. And for that purpose, we have got a panel of experts who have volunteered to help the members in solving their queries. So anybody who has any issue on re-registration can log their queries on this help desk, and they will get an answer to their queries in time. So these are two of the initiatives which will be really good for the members, and we request members to take benefit of that. Now I request Manish Bhai to throw light on some of the initiatives and his vision.
Thank you, Rusti Madam. So first of all, for organizing this wonderful out of the box webinar, where the participants can learn about how to increase value or how to value, that is very important topic for everyone. I will share some of the initiatives apart from webinar. We are doing various webinars and you are looking at it. So I will not discuss about webinar only. I will request all the members to join for direct tax refresher course, which is one of the premium program of WIRC since every year, since many years. So this year also it is starting from 5th June. So you can register yourself. One more thing I want to share, that this year your WIRC is celebrating 70th year of its foundation, and it's a great moment for all of us, great year for all of us. So we should cherish for this uh, year. Apart from that, WIRC also initiated various series. One of the series is Tech Age series. Every third Thursday of the month, we are discussing about technology, which is the need of the hour. Next month, we are starting with learning from the legends, and another series, that is CEO Speak, a journey from articleship to CEO. So this is a good chat show where a young member or any member or student can learn from the life experience of the legends, or maybe a CEO of any company who is a chartered accountant. So these are the two series. Apart from that, we have also started wellness series. We should take care of ourselves and our family in this rough phase, in this tough time with COVID. So tomorrow also we are having another program where we are going to discuss 3 dimensions of COVID-19. Tomorrow 4 to 6 p.m. 2 hour CP is there, and again it will be to absolutely free. Apart from that, in WIRC newsletter, you must have observed that we have started a new section, that is SEBI update, RBI update, and merger and acquisition updates. And we have also converted this time our newsletter into HTML format, which will be very user friendly. Apart from that, next month we are going to start CFO forum. So where the CFO of various large company, large corporate will come together, discuss the issues what they are facing, and all these things going to be taken place. We have also started mentorship program. You can visit WIRC website where a senior member can mentor a new member who can be a mentee. So this is a unique program what we have started. We have also started one long duration series on data analytics with the use of Python and SQL. That is 60 hours training, a workshop. And I'm very glad to inform you that the first batch is going to be started from 4th June. Within opening of the registration, within 48 hours, we have to close that program. So very good response, and thanks all the members for showing confidence on us. Apart from that, we have also started a new initiative called TEL, TEL, Train, Earn and Learn, where we have structured a 36-hour training for a college student, undergraduate student who are not pursuing CA course. We will give training, and after that we will place them with a CA firm who are looking to train or give some practical training to this kind of student. So those firms who are interested can write to us at wirc@icai.in if they want to hire. The first batch of this student will come second week of June. So from them, then we will start the placement of this undergraduate student. So these are some of the initiatives we have taken, and we need your support and suggestion. WIRC is also available. WIRC. I request Renuka madam to mute yourself. Yeah. So we are also available on YouTube, where we are posting GST updates, income tax updates, a short video. You can take the benefit. WIRC also started a Telegram group. Those who are interested can join that channel, Telegram channel. So we can be connected. You can be connected with WIRC. So thank you very much, Drushti madam. Over to you. You are on mute, madam.
Thank you for sharing all the updates about what is happening at WRC. Now, may I request Murtuza Khachwala, our regional council colleague, to please introduce the speaker, C. Asit Mehta.
Thank you, madam. It is really a pleasure to introduce C. Ashit Mehta. So many years back, we started seeing when he started venturing into, and like there were so many places where he had his franchisee across. Uh, Let me briefly introduce and talk about a lot of his achievements. So, C. Ashit C. Mehta is a seasoned capital market professional. He is a qualified chartered accountant, 1984, and holds a postgraduate diploma in securities law from Government Law College, 2004-5. He also attended management development programs on financial services and portfolio management by Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. He also completed the securities clearance derivative instruments program conducted by New York Institute of Finance in 1993. He also completed in 2010 the 14-module Drucker curriculum from Drucker Institute of Claremont Graduate University, offered by Prism Center of Learning. He started his career in the corporate finance markets in the year 1983 by associating with leading government security brokers of those times. He concentrated on corporate debts comprising of IDs, bill discounting, syndicating of loan, issues of commercial paper, short-term debentures, etc. He was among the initial participants in the units 1964 and other innovative financial instruments. He expanded the product portfolio by adding both the interbank forex broking and retail money changing and later on money transfer services. Besides, his passion for technology led him to the technology sector way back in 1996 with certain assignments in business process, GIS, and data management solutions. He also has served as independent member on the investment committee of an AIF. He also served as independent director on the board of a hire purchase and leasing company in the past. He has extensive experience in portfolio management, investment banking, and financial service industry in general as a directly operating officer as well as board level. He continues to be a key management personnel and board member of all his group companies, offering diverse financial services to the customers. So I can only say in brief, in one sentence, that we are here to listen to the legend or the expert today. And over to you, Drushti madam, again. Welcome, Ashit bhai. Ashit
So
bhai,
I request Ashit bhai to start the session. Over to you, Ashit bhai.
Chairman WRC, Mr. Gadia, Vice Chairman CA Drushti Desai, Secretary CA Arpit Kabra, and Regional Council Member CA Mr. Kachwala. Thank you so much for kind words about my career and all that. Let me start the presentation straight away. You're able to see my screen? Can you see the screen?
yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So before, 1 second, I have to minimize these videos. Yeah. So just a few disclaimers before we proceed, that the views are personal and not necessarily of my organization. And this is mostly for education purpose. And each situation will require different and unique solutions. So there is no one size fits all here. And the comments are, no comments are being made on any organization cited as any examples, and either derogatory or otherwise. And no advice is being rendered by this particular presentation. And okay, so here we are. Some time back, I received a call from one entrepreneur saying that I would like to meet you. So I said, okay, welcome, most welcome whenever you want to. she came and described her difficulties, saying, "Can you help me raise some resources?" So I said, "What is your business, madam?" So she says that I was supplying designer clothes to some of these large departmental stores, and 2 years back they asked me to supply not designer but mass market clothes, and now I have supplied them a lot. Now they are not paying me in time, and I want to raise money so that I can pay to my creditors. So then we had some discussions for some time, and I said, the trouble has started not because of anything else, but you have changed your business model. What is the change in the business model? The change in the business model was shifting from designer clothes for the women to mass market clothes for the women. She shifted her business from what you call a premium low quantity category to apparently or possibly high volume and low margin category. And then she in the bargain she also lost her bargaining power that she would have had she had a designer brand. When she understood this and she said, yeah, I've made a mistake and I'm going to revisit my old model, and that is what I'm going to do. I will not continue to do this so that I lose my bargaining power and then I don't have money and so on and so forth. It's a very simple example, where an entrepreneur thought that she can raise resources and that will be end of her problems of the enterprise. So to start, having started with this, now let us just get into 1 second. I am not as heavy as I think I am. So what is the background of today's discussion? Like this particular entrepreneur, there's a lot of competition in almost all the industries that we see. Whether it is, textile was always a very competitive industry, but there are many industries where we have seen tremendous competition, and this has also resulted stress into the sectors. But in addition to that, now COVID times have come. We have had lockdowns and we've had go slows and all kind of things, which has also created a huge amount of stress in the sectors. But then we've also seen that there have been a lot of tremendous opportunities in new age industries, whether it is your 4G mobile phones or now 5G mobile phones will come, or many such industries where there are even today. So for example, even your, let's say, this video conferencing industry, sky has been the limit, and we've seen some fantastic amount of results in those areas. But the fact of life is that the future is not what it used to be. It never will be, right? Because if it is going to be repeating as this history repeat itself, then it's not really the future. It has to be different. The background also says, the current situation is also that there has been a lot of changes happening in the landscape, in the systems, in the economy, and the society, and so forth. In fact, if some of you who may have read the book by Ray Kurzweil, are you able to hear? Shall I continue? Yeah. So, the rate of change itself, if you see, has been changed. Not the change, but the rate of change. The acceleration is happening. And earlier we in hardware industry, price is becoming half, or the processing power doubling in every 18 months, as we are familiar with Moore's law. But now this rate of 18 months itself is now going to be reducing. So what we see, that the rate of change itself is accelerating, leading to what Ray Kurzweil calls a singularity, which will mean that all of us will have to be continuously learning, unlearning, so that we are able to keep pace with the new world. So obviously the information gap that is happening in not only among all of us who are professionals, but also among the entrepreneurs who may know their businesses very well, their products very well, their markets very well, but many of them may not really be aware with the management practices or what is happening in other industries who may be their competition. So for example, we used to say before COVID hit us, we used to ask a question that for travel industry, who is the biggest competitor of travel industry? And when we used to say that it is the Cisco router company, people used to, not believe it at all, because we used to say that, look, video conferencing requires high amount of, processing power and routers and all that. When Cisco is providing that and making it possible, why would somebody go to USA for a 3-hour meeting or a 2-hour meeting and split 3 days and time zones and jet lags and so on and so forth? So sometimes, we have to unlearn what we believe we have learned, and also be aware of the competition that might come from unexpected areas. I mean, many of you may have heard the sentence from a company like a Coke or a Pepsi. When you ask them who is their biggest competitor, they are not going to name the other cold drink company. So Coke will not say Pepsi is my competitor, but Coke says water is my competitor. If you drink water, then I have lost a chance to sell you a bottle of Coke or something like that. So what we hope to discuss today is that after the discussion, I hope I can provide you some guidelines as to analyzing a particular opportunity or a problem that a particular entrepreneur is facing, and whether as a result, what are the actions required to be taken. And basically, what do we when we want to look at opportunity or problem, what are the things that we must consider before we give any advice? Uh, uh, so when you say unleash enterprise value, now I'll change the word from unlock to unleash, because I thought the lockdowns and unlockdowns and all are quite bad in current scenario, and unleash being always gradual, whereas unlock and lock is like a click. So unleash being more gradual, I thought that may be a more appropriate word. So when you say unleash enterprise value, so obviously we understand value as what is the potential of the enterprise, what is it that it is capable of achieving, and that potential, whether it is being encashed or not, that is one interpretation. The other one, many people they come and say, I want to raise resources, and thereby also the valuation of the company, and the resources can be plain simple debt or plain simple capital or equity or a combination or mezzanine or whatever you want to call it. And sometimes, or very rarely, I would say that unleashing enterprise value is understood as unleashing the values of or the codes of governance, the value system of an organization, which what it will bring to the company, that many times is not realized. In today's world, many times we think that the ends justify the means, and the values need not be there. So we will, try to address that also to an extent in last few slides. And what are the relationship of all these things when we are looking at valuing an enterprise, not from a pure simple valuer's point of view, but from many other points of view. So what is value when we say, or what is price? I mean, most of us will think it is same. What is the difference between the value and price? But let us visit some of the dictionary meanings where value is conventionally defined as something which is value of a money or monetary worth, or where we can exchange the goods or services or whatever. So for example, in the barter economy, if you could exchange 2 bushels of grain for one goat, and that was the value of a goat, or a 2 bushels of grain, or vice versa. Then relative worth, utility or importance. What is the importance of or what is the utilization, or what is the value of a particular product? It could be a car, or it could be a plane, or whatever. And there is one definition which is very stark, or which hits you. That is the amount of money for which something will find a buyer in a marketplace. And this is the common understanding that most of us have, where we think that is the value. So for example, if a stock is quoted at 30 rupees, then that we assign it as the value of that company, 30 rupees into number of shares outstanding. So is that the right interpretation? That's the question. So we are familiar with parameters of enterprise valuation. Many of us might be registered valuers also, and many of us may have learned valuation while completing our CA, as well as while doing what we call portfolio management. And we are very familiar with tangible and measurable parameters. And I'm going to go a little quickly here, because some of this may be very, very well known to you already, and the real matter will come after about 2 to 3 slides from this one. So we are all familiar with asset-based book value. Embedded value, for some of you who may not be aware, is something, for example, insurance companies, where they have insurance policies sold, let's say life insurance policy for 30 years, and there is an embedded value because the customer is likely to pay the premium for rest of the years, and that is where the embedded value comes in. We are also familiar with income-based valuation methods like earning per share, return on capital employed, CAGR, etc., etc. Then, of course, replacement value. Just now, one of the panelists was talking about replacement of certain assets and how the valuation was very, very small for an enterprise, but the entrepreneurs never understood that portion. Sometimes we also use market capitalization, where we are using EPS multiplied by the PE of rest of the industry and average of that, and try to maybe normalize it. Then of course we sometimes do potential based, what is called cash flow or discounted cash flow projections. Point of sales. Example of point of sales. This is I would say of recent origin of last a decade or so. So for example, if you are looking to value, let us say a supermarket, so then you will try to look at what is the footfalls per square foot, or what is the sales per square foot. Or you are trying to evaluate an oil marketing company, so you want to know how many petrol or gas stations they have, and per gas station what is the sales. Or for example, a pizza company, so how many new stores are there, what is the sales in the new stores, are they 1 year vintage or less, and what are the number of stores and the older than 1 year, and what is the growth over there. Similarly, number of clients. So those who are familiar with internet days, many of the websites were were valued in those days based on eyeballs, which is equivalent to footfalls in a supermarket. And the classic India Online and Satyam deal for about 250 crore in the year, I think 1999, was actually an alarming deal at that point of time. So people value on many bases. One of them, some of them are written here. Then we also have intangible or subjective parameters, which are often taken into account, often not taken into account. And there is no way to really sit down and say that these are definitely taken into account or not. Some of there are, what are the transparency norms in that organization, and what are the compliance. To a CA community, I don't have to emphasize these two values at all, because compliance is what you are very, very familiar with. And as a chartered accountant also, as a, what you call, if I may use, a supplier of services to any of the company that you may be auditing, etc., you will be extremely uncomfortable if you find that the compliance is not up to the mark in dealing with organization. So as a stakeholder, as a supplier, you are uncomfortable, then as an investor or as a buyer, what can happen, you can very, very clearly imagine. Another item that I put here is, what is the legal system in the country of operations? Many times we just simply ignore this, particularly when we are looking at trans-border transactions. And I can go on and give a lecture on only on this particular item, legal system in the country of operations, and how does it impact valuation. So for example, take let's say cold drink company here in India, and a cold drink company, let's say in Kenya. Now the legal system, how far you enforce your contracts or other things, will really help you understand how fast you can do other contracts. Because if a particular contract is going to take 10 years to enforce, then the way you operate is quite different. So ease of doing business, which our prime minister and many other leaders of the world talk about. What is the ease of doing business? Are you making the customer run? Because ease of doing business also is double-edged sword. If it is very easy to enter and exit, then your competition also can enter very easily and exit very easily. So thereby your valuations can get infected. Then macroeconomic parameters. These are not directly relating to that particular company. To give you a very simple example, let's say we are doing a valuation and we are putting a terminal value, and we say perpetual growth is 3% or 4% or whatever. Now, how does this 3% or 4% come? We never pay attention to that. Is the economy likely to grow at 3% in perpetuity and real growth of 3% or 2% or 5%? I've seen people taking 8 and 9% real growth in perpetuity. And obviously what it does to the enterprise valuation, you can well imagine. And then, when you say 8% real growth, and let's say inflation is 3%, then you're talking about 11% per year. So which obviously is going to get you some fantastic values, which may or may not ultimately materialize. But so what are the macroeconomic parameters? Is the economy itself growing at that rate? Is the industry itself growing at that? What is the entry barriers? If the entry barriers are large, then maybe somebody can grow. But if the entry barriers are not there, then can I grow at 8% perpetuity? If the rest of the economy is growing at 2%, can I grow at 8%? So this type of issues, are required to be, noted. And these are fairly subjective, but they are very important, because terminal value will also depend on this. Then what is the governance track record of board members and the key management persons? How fair they would be in dealing, with the rest of the stakeholders of the ecosystem that they are operating in. Will they be fair with their suppliers? Will they be fair with their customers, and so on and so forth? I can think of an example. I don't want to name the organization. It's more than 1 lakh crore rupees under management they had, and they went bust just about 3 years back. And the governance track record of the board of members was so horrible, so horrible. And we used to actually wonder as to how this company is still surviving. and then it went bust because one day it had to catch up, and that's what happened. And if somebody had, and many people actually did value those shares at very very high prices, and they really lost about, I think, 95% of it within like less than 2 years. So what is the track record of the board members is very important when you really want to value. Of course, this can change, but whatever historical is available, we should pay attention to that. And what are the values, organizational values, that are articulated and practiced? Because many times we see a whole what you call Dhobi list or wash list in the annual report, that these are our values and purpose and ethics and beliefs, and but are they being practiced? Do the people believe it, or they are only to show? It is just like your window shopping kind of stuff. So these items are often ignored while we do a valuation of an enterprise. So enterprise value, I would say, is a combination of business, management, financial, and even human strategies. But market prices are not necessarily, at least not in the short term. The market price that a particular enterprise may command for a few shares or a controlling stake or 100%, it can be very, very different from the true value of the enterprise. But then what is a market? I mean, we are talking about market price. So I'm going to bore you a little bit because there is a relationship between valuation and market price. So I'll just take you to some theory. And so market is an organized place, physical or virtual. Stock exchanges are virtual nowadays, but you can always, go to a mandi and, buy grain or buy vegetable, which is a physical marketplace, where a willing buyer and a willing seller congregate regularly. The reason I said willing and I'll explain to you in a minute, but they have to come regularly. So if they happen once in 10 years, then it's not really a marketplace in that sense. And what do they do when the willing buyer and the willing seller come together? They come together and discover a price of the product or a solution or a service, whatever you want to do. And after discovering, then exchange or the transaction has to happen. Otherwise, it is just an estimate of a market price. It is not really a marketplace. So when you say willing buyer and a willing seller, so if there is a compulsion on anybody to buy or anybody to sell, then the price discovered will not be true market price. So there has to be no pressure on either side. There has to be a need, and both of them should be able and willing, as you say, able and willing to execute the transaction. Having said that, market price is the price negotiated by the willing buyer and the willing seller for a given product, devoid of any compulsion, as I mentioned, based on information available with each of them at that point of time. Now, why do I put this rider based on information available? Because both of them obviously cannot have the same information at the same time, right? And what will happen if they have the same information at the same time? Will there be a transaction? There will not be a transaction, because then if the information is equal, then how do we expect to gain? There is no consumer surplus, practically speaking. So this definition that I have put here, includes the barter transaction and talks about a capital market for them. So from the portfolio management point of view, weak and efficient form of information system. So information will not be equal. Even in today's internet-based days, information available to a buyer and seller are not equal, and that is why transaction takes place. To give you a simple example, in stock markets, let's say somebody bought a stock for 300 rupees. So when he bought, obviously somebody sold it for 300. Now the seller, in most cases, would have thought that 300 rupees is a better than normal price or a value that he should get, and so 300 he is willing to sell. Conversely, the buyer is buying it at 300 rupees because he thinks that the price will go up. He's looking at the future, or he thinks that the value should be much more than 300 rupees and it is underpriced. So that is why, based on the information asymmetry between the buyer and the seller, there is a difference in estimate of the value of that particular stock, and that is why there is a transaction. If both of them thought that the stock is fairly priced at 300, then nothing would happen. So here that's what I just talked about, that buyers and sellers have to have the different estimates in mind, and that is when the transaction will happen. Otherwise, there will be no transaction, and this is true for most of the cases. And obviously, the price also, not only value and the price have to be different in their mind, and that is when a transaction takes place. So then here we come to the connection between the value and the price. So what we see happening in let's say a stock market, where a stock is traded at 300, well, let's say closing price is 300 rupees. Now we take the whole outstanding capital of the company multiplied by 300, and this is, we say, is the market value or the market capitalization of the whole company. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I think I have best of the connection in the country. Yeah, you can hear me, I suppose. So I thought I have best of the connection in the country, but sometimes things happen. Okay. So, we are talking about what is an enterprise value. It's a bundle of what you call measurable, abstract. We just saw in one of the previous slides, past and future. When discounted cash flows, etc., are being taken into account. Emotion and fact. So, especially when you talk to an entrepreneur, if he has spent 30 years in this company, then there is going to be a lot of emotions. When you ask him to sell, or if he wants to sell, the price that he will attach to per share of the enterprise value is going to be way, way, way different from a potential buyer who has many, many choices. So many times, enterprise value is a bundle of those emotions and facts. Classic example of emotions, is your uh, loss-making units, which are held by many governments, and they are not able to get out of it because of their earlier socialistic policies. So tangible, intangible, and it is also often, the valuation is also affected, upwards or downwards by competitors and the industry structure itself. Because the industry structure is extremely competitive, then you will have a different type of multiples, different type of valuation, etc., etc. So it's a sum of many parts which are not really apparent many times, and we'll come to some of those. It's an art and science. As we always say, it's not a pure science or pure mathematics, but it's an art also. So as we said, confusion arises when the market value and market price are interchangeably, and similarly, value and price, market cap as well as enterprise value are used interchangeably, which are quite different. So when you say what is unleashing, what do we mean by unleashing? So we are saying we are releasing the embedded and potential of the embedded is what is really there, the existing value, and the potential of the enterprise by various methods. The methods can be many, and that is where we will now be quickly addressing in a few minutes. And the purpose has to be very clear. Why do you want to do that? That has to be very, very clear. And obviously, many times the purpose is that I want to, take money, I want to retire. But does it benefit all the stakeholders of the enterprise? I would personally feel that it must benefit all the stakeholders in the enterprise. Then, we are really talking of long-term benefits. And to give an example of Jack Welch, when he took over as chairman of GE, the market cap was 12 billion. And in 20 years, he exited as well as entered many businesses. And he had the market cap of GE to $250 billion. In a mature economy, global market, this is a feat which is really unparalleled, I would say, in the sense of, and GE is a very, very old company. He sold off, like I said, 500 acquisitions. So he said, look, I will be either number one, number two in my chosen field of business, otherwise I'm not interested. So he unleashed the enterprise value, not necessarily, by just selling a few shares or something, but doing many other things. So it can, unleash and potential energy for a future, which again, you also many times they say that the best way to manage the future is to make it yourself. So, the potential energy when it is unleashed and you are making the future of your company, your industry, and your society, then that is a fantastic position to be in. And end of the day, what it does, when you are valuing your enterprise properly, when you are asking all the questions that need to be asked, you are going to allocate your capital in an efficient manner, allow minimum wastages, and that's what the stock markets do, the capital markets do. They exit and enter various industries depending on their perceptions of what is going to happen, and that helps you allocate capital more efficiently than in a what you see many times in a command economy, where the government decides that put up this plant, put up that plant for whatever reason. So, classic example of some of you who may have seen the movie called Pretty Woman, where there is a hero and he, acquires companies and then he, breaks it up into various divisions and parts and assets and all that. And some of the part is, usually much, much higher than what he acquired it for, and that thereby benefiting all the shareholders of that company. We have recently seen in Mumbai in our last about 15 years that there are enough textile mills in the central Mumbai, and they were not allowed to do anything. They were simply dying. And then when the government of Maharashtra allowed them to use the mill land to develop it for other purposes, some tremendous amount of value we have seen. Very nice malls, very nice hotels, and so on and so forth. Even office complexes have come up there, and the value has been unleashed. So why or whether we should unleash enterprise value just like that, or what? Like we say, should it be as per the owner's choice? just because owners wants to retire or owners want to exit. So that's what we see happening, many times in our own country, where PSU enterprises are being sold on policy rather than, any long-term interest. So, finance minister also announced that we will sell X unit or Y unit. Or sometimes there is a difference between, privatization and disinvestment. In fact, many of them are they are called disinvestment and not privatization also. So should it be left just because the owner wants to do? There are many examples where owner says, I want to get 10%, I want to get 20%. Whether the enterprise needs the money or not doesn't matter. I would like to sell my stake, and the expense is of course going to be borne by the company in an offer for sale as you know. So should it be owner versus management? So if the management thinks that they don't require the money, or they require the money, and the owner should not take the money, then what happens? If there's a conflict between, let's say, an enterprise which needs the money for its own development. Let's say, for example, ONGC wants to raise, let's say, $10 billion and go and explore for gas as well as crude in, let's say, Indian Ocean. Should a government allow them or not allow? Should government say that no, you can't go and raise the money from capital market because that will risk our stake to go down from controlling to less than controlling. So these kind of issues become very important, that where the management wants to do something, owner wants to do something else. So if the enterprise becomes a vehicle of fulfilling the owner's needs versus the ecosystem of all the stakeholders, including management. This is very stark, I've seen especially in family managed businesses, where a family is, and we have this unique concept of promoter, at least so far, where the family is controlling, and they would like to do a few things with the, maybe even do family division and do all sorts of things with the company that was held by, let's say, one founder, and now he's got 3 children. And then how do you separate these interests, and what do you do? And we've seen many family splits in the last 15-20 years, where this kind of things have been done. Sometimes the splits have been even done, for avoiding targets, for what you call hostile acquisitions and all that. So the expression, in family managed business, is it the family and what is important? Is it family who is important, or is the business which is important? It becomes a very crucial thing. So Peter Drucker says that the key word is business in family managed business, and not family. So the conflict between and confluence of business needs and families' desires and objectives are always seen. I mean, always practically, and even in succession issues. So I mean, let's say somebody wants to sell off a very good business because gentleman wants to retire. But if the business is doing well, then how do we handle it? Should he close it down? Should he sell it off? Should he hand it over to the employees to run? How do we do it? So what are the repositories of an enterprise value? As we all know, there are assets, divisions, brands, licenses, patents, distribution network, and there are some future points which are repositories of enterprise value, which we are seeing of late. So for example, some of you who are familiar with Noah Harari, he talks about hacking human brains. He says if you have ability to hack human brains, that is going to be a huge advantage in the next century, in this century. Or Mr. Ambani, Mukesh Ambani has said many times that data is new oil. So the person who is in oil business is saying data is new oil. Crude is no more, the carbon is no more than new oil, So knowledge about client behavior, which is going to be a major repository of an enterprise value. And this is not really tangible. I mean, I just heard the chairman talking about a big data analytic course and all that, and got full in 48 hours. I have investment in a big data company, and I've seen them handle terabytes of data for many organizations. And sometimes it is scary. Like Noah Harari also says, it is extremely scary that a few companies, may have capability today, not only your track record as to what you did, not only the digital dust that you may have left all over the, wherever you went, but also they have capability to hack human brain. So they can predict what you will do in next 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 5 days, whether you will buy X or Y or Z or whatever, right? Allegations of, manipulation on election campaign by Mr. Trump. We all read about it. So knowledge about client behavior can be a huge asset and a repository of an enterprise value. There are many such items which are offered on balance sheet. Typically, for example, right to exploit mines, which may or may not have been reflected, at a fair value. And nowadays, of course, new accounting standards are taking care of a lot of stuff. For example, take a right to receive dividends or profits in a particular enterprise. So these are sometimes off the balance sheet depending on the country and accounting standards, and they can be extremely valuable and not reflected at all in the enterprise. And of course, then we are talking of many patents, or value of patent is often not at the true value. Participatory notes, contract for differences, market link debentures, the current norm. These are all many examples of future and intangible repositories of enterprise values. Bitcoins, of course, digital art, you are all aware. Digital art is very recent, where we see some art getting sold for phenomenal prices. We don't know whether it is a fad. Bitcoins, we don't know whether it is a fad. But going by the Tesla owner, he did actually put it on his balance sheet and put it as an asset. So what is the value of that, true value of that, is a major issue. This list is, of course, not final. It is always evolving as to where the values will be perceived or where the values may actually reside. So when do you unleash it? So like we said, do you sell it because the owner needs the money, like we have seen in PSU divestments? Or when a bank becomes bust, the government of India wants to say, all right, now I'll get rid of this bank and give it to XYZ enterprise that I own elsewhere. So is it that way? Or is it when the enterprise needs funds? Because here again, we are separating between enterprise and owner. So what you saw last year, for example, quite a few banks came and raised money in anticipation of bad debts that they may have to face in Corona times. A couple of private sector banks raised money at very good valuations and very large sums of money very quickly. So sometimes enterprise may want to raise money because they want to go and pursue new opportunity, or they may want to go to other countries and so on and so forth. I just gave an example of ONGC. Sometimes your certain divisions or the products may need funds. I can give you many examples where, let's say, you have a company where they have a real estate division and they have an engineering infrastructure division. Say for example, Larsen & Toubro or Godrej. So how do we distinguish between various needs of various products or divisions or segments, and do we go and straight away and unleash, go and raise money, or do something else? So these are the questions that we need to ask, or the entrepreneur needs to ask, as to why am I looking at unleashing enterprise value? What is the rationale behind it? So give another example of competitive development. So recently we saw entry of Jio in a big way into the country, and we also saw the impact that it had on the subscriber base of Vodafone and Airtel, and Vodafone having difficulty even till now. And everybody knew that Jio will come with whatever their schemes are in maybe 3 or 5 years time when they were laying fiber itself. Everybody knew. Question was when they will come. Is it 5 years or 6 years or 3 years? But then Vodafone and Airtel, for example, raised a lot of money at various points of time. But Vodafone was not ready, and then when the price war happened, they have had a tremendous effect on that. So should they have raised the money in anticipation, because the competitive developments were happening? That's the question. Sometimes, you may be required, an enterprise may be forced to raise money. So some of us who are familiar with FERA regulations, when the Janata Party came and all that, and where Coke had, IBM had to leave the country, we saw many FERA dilutions, like Procter & Gamble, which was Richardson and Hindustan at that time, and many such companies. Or, for example, today we see the Reserve Bank of India has rules on as to how much ownership can a private individual have, or even a promoter can have in a private bank. So those fiats, so those regulatory stipulations force you to unleash it, to sell it. So Bandhan Bank is a classic case. You don't have a choice. You have to sell it within that timeline. Sometimes you may be forced to unleash it, or you may want to unleash it to take care of some other risk. So, for example, when the British left this country, or the exodus happened in Burma or Myanmar in 60s, or Uganda, all these were instances where they had to sell and run away. They had no choice. So did they? They had no choice for timing. They had to just go. So there are many such examples where regulatory facts can play a very important role. And if you are able to anticipate it and reduce your risk or dilute your risk, it can be useful. So as a part of risk management, so take example of Union Carbide or some nuclear electricity plants, or even tobacco plants. So you don't want to keep all the risks that are associated with this type of products. And if you have 100% of this particular say company, then you may want to look at diversifying your financial risk by selling off part of your stock to some others. So the variables that you have in unleashing, whether to unleash, etc., are what is the product stage? The products that you are dealing in, are they at growth stage, introduction stage, maturity, or life cycle end? Because then if it is ending the life cycle, then you may not want to raise any money at all. Like I mentioned, what is the competitive landscape and is it getting aggravated? Like what we see in telecom or finance industry in particular. Sometimes you may need know-how and you have no choice. Or for example, take defense technology and you want to manufacture some very high-tech, let's say drones, and we may not have the technology. So you may have to go and get the technology, and the JV partner says, I will not give you technology unless you participate, allow me to participate in equity also. And so, for example, again, take vaccine invention and manufacture is the same. So we can have a situation where the JV partners will insist on having a part of the equity too, and they don't have a choice. Come back to an example of Bharti Airtel. For example, when the incoming was going to become free, everybody knew incoming will become free, and as a result, the market will expand like it is nobody's business. We had maybe 15, 20 players from Tata's to Birla's to Modi's to you name it in the telecom industry. Now, Bharti Airtel at that time went and raised money from Warburg Pincus, $290 million. And then when the expansion of the business happened, it fetched Warburg 1.83 billion only in 6 years. So Bharti took the money to manage that kind of a growth. So there are many parameters that you need to pay attention before you take a final call. Sometimes you may want to acquire some other banks or other competitors, backward supplier, forward player, and so on and so forth, and affect the capacity that the industry has, which also will have effect on pricing. In banking, this is a very standard thing that keeps happening all over the world, where similar players merge and thereby try to bring down the cost and try to unleash some value for the stockholders or stakeholders. Sometimes you may require very major fund, and one was the Union Carbide kind of example, which was a risk based. Sometimes you require a very high amount of money just to do molecule research. It is not only the amount of money that you may require, but even the timeline may be very long, and the failure rate also can be very high. So then you allow others to come and participate in that research, and Glenmark or Biocon are classic examples of molecule based research, and they keep on selling it some interest in that molecule at various points of time. So then they are also unlocking value in that particular effort that they are doing. So Union Carbide example I gave you, for example, Paytm, the Indian owners, Mr. Vijay Shekhar Molal, virtually now very small or next to nil, or maybe 5% or something. And they have, probably anticipated, or maybe they thought that this competition will really heat up in this area, and which we have seen a lot of competition from other enterprises like Bharat Pay, Beam itself, Phone Pay, and so on and so forth. Sometimes you also want to unleash or share your risk, like I gave example of prospecting crude or precious minerals. So there are many parameters that need to pay attention as to why do we want to unleash the value, or how do we want to unleash the value. Having done that, then there is a timing issue. So just to give you a very simple slide here, those of us who have studied management are very familiar that the product normally has a 4 stages: introduction, growth, maturity, and decline. And the CAGRs can be very different when the product is at different stage. So for example, when a product is in introduction, the growth rate can be, compared to GDP, of course, can be very high, because it may be taking care of what you call unmet need or unmet potential that a customer has. So return potential are also sometimes very high because of the innovative things that might be there. I can give an example of a failure here because the risk can be very high. So those of you may have seen that what do they call it, mono scooter, Segway. It's called Segway. It was supposed to be a very good innovation by the owner, but then it's not really caught on at all in the rest of the world. So risk was very high. And there are many other examples. Today in the world of energy storage batteries. So we are all familiar with those batteries which we are using in our phones and even in cars. But the innovation that is going to be happening is so rapid, I would say. So though it is an introduction stage, the risk can be very high, but then winner can take all if they succeed. There are many game apps. You see in the application stores, new game has come. So it's an introduction stage, and the life is of course very short. So we used to have that Angry Birds and all kind of games. which are already introduction, did very, very well. We grew very well, lots of downloads, fantastic valuation, but the risk was very high. And what has happened to some of them? I don't know how many of you play Angry Birds or that fruit cutting or whatever that game was. Products which are in growth have slightly lower risk, lower return potential, lower CAGR. Examples are smart mobile phones, solar panels, and they are all in growth stage. UPI, for example. In maturity stage, we have seen products like airline travel, textiles, cement, steel. I mean, you can say a little bit between maturity and growth, where the risks are moderate and growth can be moderate, returns potential. This is of course assuming there is no cartelization, which is being alleged in many industries in the country. And in decline, like fax machines, telex, CDs, we see that these are going to die very soon. Now, why are we talking about this? Because this is a relation as to when do you go and unleash the value. Do you go by the product life cycle? Or do you go by something else? So here is the question. Does the product life cycle maturity stage mean one should unleash enterprise value? So to go back to the slide, do we do it at maturity level? Do we do it at growth level? Do we do it at decline level? Bharti did it at growth level. There are many guys who do it at maturity, and some of them wait for decline. So to come back to the question, we have to ask what are the returns on a product at this stage, low or high, and the visibility of that. What are the business risks which we referred to, including political unrest, renewable energy versus carbon-based fuel, which is a societal value, and so on and so forth. Then what is the stage of owner life cycle and succession plans? Will they be able to manage themselves, or will we require a new management who may need to be trained in some of these technologies? Sale of individual products or brand lines can also help unleash enterprise value partially. But do we sell it? At what time do we sell it? And there are many examples which I'll be coming to on that. And difference between product life cycle, whether introduction, growth, maturity, decline, is it same as enterprise life cycle? Now, products of a company may be in different stages. Now, for example, if you take an example of our homegrown company called Pidilite, which has Fevicol, but there are more than Fevicol. There are 1,000 plus products in Pidilite, and so if a particular product, say Fevicol, is facing competition, let's say from 10 other competitors, does it mean that Pidilite as a company is also in a decline or a competitive or a growth or a maturity stage? 3M has got hundreds of products, over 30 billion sales. Some of them may be in decline, like those post-it notes and all that, or maybe having severe competition with very little profit. That does not mean that the enterprise also is in a decline. So we have to differentiate between the product life cycle, risk returns of the product versus the whole of enterprise. So like I said, enterprise can be in a different stage. Real estate companies, for example, and many times, financial needs versus management maturity and capabilities are also very important. We'll come to that in a few minutes. And I mean, financial need, let's say management capabilities of a private sector bank and public sector bank are different, whether we like it or not. Maybe not individual level, but at management level or even owner level. So, some of the story is that an efficient enterprise may not decline for a long time, though a particular product may decline. And so just taking a decision to unleash enterprise value, divest or acquire based on a sole product may or may not be the correct answer. So DuPont is a company, as you know, 1802 and largest chemical company in the world. It still continues to do very well. Or a Godrej and Boys, our homegrown company, now almost 25 years old, 14 lines of business, and it's going very strong. So many products, of Godrej, earlier days you would have seen, there is severe competition, and Godrej may not, really have all that profitability, but company survives. So we have to pay attention to both and say that enterprise in decline stage, again, Connors need not have all products to in decline. So there are two examples. One of Toyota. Those of you who are familiar, Toyota originally was a textile manufacturing company, and they use that know-how to improve the quality of manufacturing when they are manufacturing the motor cars. Similarly, Nokia has evolved through so many things: paper, electricity generation machinery, military equipment for communication, then plastics, chemicals, and ultimately they came into mobile telephony. And now once again, their Nokia phones are no more in fashion. So product stage versus what we call the enterprise stage. These are two different and need to be paid attention to. So just to give an example now, take a case of an enterprise which is earning 10% margin, that's on 1,000 crore of sales, so which is 100 crores, versus another company which is earning 1% only on 10 times. That is a 10,000 crore of sale and having the same profit. But the risk of a 10,000 crore and a 1,000 crore are not same. All right. So how much do you unleash? Do you sell 100%, like many of them are not willing to do, like government? Or you can take a case of Tata Consultancy, TCS shares, where Tata Group started with the smallest of divestment of 10%, and when over a gradually over so many years, they have been unleashing share or selling shares or realizing part of the value of TCS shares over a period. So that is a gradual one. That is where your unlock versus unleash will make sense. Sometimes the enterprises want to sell what the market can bear, and many private equity companies do that, and they will say, okay, I want to get out of my full 25%, and what is the market can bear, I will get full 25%, and what price can they pay? So there are many such examples. So should we do that? Then regulatory mandated that we discussed, where FERA or RBI mentions that you don't really have a choice, you are allowed to unleash or dilute that much. Sometimes strategy based, so like in defense you are allowed maximum 74%, so you can only do that much. Sometimes they will insist. So how much value to unleash is also a question of many parts. Now we come to how do we unleash. So obviously we are all familiar with equities and debt and so on and so forth. We can do it in private markets, that is your funds, families and friends, or even non-public issues with less than 250 people buying it directly if you know them, or you come to the SME, or you come to the main boards and so on and so forth. You can also unleash by doing some unconventional things rather than selling your equity and all. So for example, you may do a brand licensing where you license your brand to a few guys and make money. There are many such brand leaders. I mean, Amitabh Bachchan is a classic case, where he tried to make his own ABL corporation, Amitabh Bachchan, ABC corporation, and of course he did not succeed. Goodnight is a classic case, where the brand itself is sold and the manufacturing may or may not go with it. Sometimes you also get into distribution channels. So Trump, we have seen some of the Trump towers being licensed by Mr. Trump, which is a classic case where he's licensing himself. And say, for example, phone being branded as Porsche, and they will cost 5 times or 10 times. So that is also a way to, and you can also get some upfront payment and so on and so forth for doing such deals if the brand is strong enough. So where do we unleash it? Private market, public market, P's. Can we time the market? We dealt with the first question in the previous slide. Can we time the market? This is a very classic question that we keep facing, that is this a good time? And yesterday I got a question from somebody saying, how do you think the markets? Is this a good time to come out with, raise money and sell some shares and all? Gentleman is about 200 crore company, but very high tech company, very high potential. So yesterday only he was asking me. So I said, can you time it? Who knows the future? Nobody knows the future. We should be unleashing, or you should be diluting, or you should be raising money in the company, provided there are other reasons. You cannot ever, look at saying, no, I want to sell when just before the peak and so on and so forth. That is an impossibility. And then which market? So, of late we have seen a couple of guys going abroad and raising money in the US markets. So you can do a GDR, you can do an ADR. If you're borrowing, you can do masala bonds, that is rupee bonds. You can also do other ways of external commercial borrowings. And if you are able to take care of your currency risk. So do we go there in those geographies? And so what is your target market? And what are the implications of those preferences? Like, if you go and raise money in GDR, what are the implications of that? I mean, does it mean that, for example, in an ADR, GDR, the transfer is almost automatic? So if somebody acquires a very large chunk of your GDR, and let's say that GDR itself is a large chunk of your outstanding capital, then somebody can acquire, let's say, 10% or 15%, and you will have difficulties. So those preferences or liabilities that may arise have to be paid attention to. Or take, for example, if you want to raise money in say, US market, now what are the regulations that SEC has? Are you going to be able to comply with that? So that is the meaning of the preference of, looking at an ADR market or a Luxembourg, issue and so on and so forth. So this we need to understand as to where to unleash is also very, very important. Then what is the instrument? What are the local laws? I mean, the corruption laws that the Americans have are quite different from the corruption laws that we see in, say, our country. So do we go and unleash it there? Do we go and raise money there? Should I go to Middle East market, say Dubai, and go to a Dubai Nasdaq and try to raise money? What laws will apply? Will it be UAE laws or will it be the US laws? So these are extremely important. Like, for example, I can tell you about one company. One second, one company um, which raised money in across the globe, right from Japan to America. And the CFO was telling me that whenever they declare any important announcement, they have to time it in such a way that all the markets are closed, so that no markets gets advantage over others. Now these are very subtle things, but this come only after experience. You don't want to be violating a law, let's say, by releasing it at a time where Japan gets a preference over India, and then people will say how come, and so on and so forth. So which instrument, which market are very, very important. Like, for example, instrument, I can give an example of, let's say, Middle East. Now, if you want to go and raise money in Saudi Arabia on a debenture, you're going to find it very difficult because, those countries don't really believe in interest as a return method because they have Sharia. So you can't really be looking at that particular market and looking at that particular instrument. You may have to have some participatory notes and such things over there. And then what are the timelines and what are the costs of raising money, in each of the cases? And the cost will include not only what you pay for underwriting and legal fees and all, you also want to possibly estimate what is the cost post capital raising. And that post capital raising cost will include, again, not just cost of filing regularly or cost of having a IR advisor and so on and so forth. It could also be potential litigation. So if something goes wrong, let us say, one company in India had certain issues, certain allegations made against them, and this company was listed in USA. Based on these allegations, the market price of the company, really went down for quite, and of course later on there was no problem. But during those period of about a month, somebody in United States that I'm going to file a class action suit and I'm going to take this company to task. Now you wind up defending that, and there is a cost of that. So now we come to a different aspect of valuation and value and all. Enterprise values, I would say that the values that an enterprise represents, not just the value, they drive the valuations. Now let's take the classic case of Volkswagen, which we saw just 2 years back, had supposed to have done something wrong in their programming so that the numbers that were given were different at different points of time, and what is then subsequently called Dieselgate. So when that happened, after that, they have paid $33 billion in fine. They have committed to spend 18 billion for corrective action. And at that time, the stock price went down from euro 167 to 100, and market cap of, loss of more than almost 50% globally. This is because the value or the values that Volkswagen articulated but followed were different, and then they were not acceptable to the society at large. What is the value system? When we, whatever the value system that we follow as an enterprise, as an organization, we also need to pay attention that value systems are sometimes different between different societies. Classic cases, corruption. So if you have corruption in a, let's say, third world country in Africa, and the tolerance or acceptance for that versus in other societies may be very, very different. So if you want to do business, let's say in a country where corruption is a precondition, and also do a listing in USA, you will have some very, very major issues because you'll be required to report and you may be fined locally in United States also. So what are the value systems in different societies that we need to pay attention as an organization before we try to go and raise any money or unleash or even distribute our products and so on and so forth. Now the value systems itself are also changing in the society from time to time, as you all know. So just about more than 100 years back in the United States itself, slavery was acceptable practice, more than 100 years. Child labor in UK was very, very regularly done in mining and other companies. But in our country, we've seen child labor, so there are laws in some of the most dangerous jobs. We've also seen discrimination based on sex or race, and still the jury is out whether the women are paid equally for the same job or not. So these value systems are very important in the country that you have to follow. And if you don't have those value systems, then you will find it very difficult, and you will also find yourself in lawsuits. I can think of a company where they had a large presence in United States, and one of their senior employee was accused of sexual harassment by one lady employee, and the enterprise value crashed like anything because people did not understand what it may entail. So the value system that we follow as an organization, along with our employees, also will be very, very important. But eternal values, don't do to others what you would not like others if others were to do it to you. That makes sense, and that is what one should follow. In conclusion, I would just simply say, evaluate and challenge evaluation point of view. The stakeholders profile. Who are the stakeholders? Whether it's customers, suppliers, employees, even the government being a last stakeholder, and the shareholders, all five of them. What are the profile of your product or industry that you operate in, and where does the enterprise stand? What is the risk return paradigm, and what are the future expectations of the enterprise for each product, each market, and so on and so forth? And what is the maturity of the enterprise to comply with this new ownership control and compliance structures? So I can give you an example of one company which about 10 years back, a real estate company, and they asked me to do a public issue. So I told him that you'll have some severe difficulties in public issue because the kind of area that you operate in, basically gets into a lot of corruption. In my view, I said you should raise money at best from a private equity fund, which is non-American, because if you end up paying any price, then you're going to be in deep trouble. And they did not listen to me. They did a public issue, and then they had serious issues. Believe me, serious issues for a variety of reasons. So we have to pay attention to the maturity of the enterprise. Many times, in fact, nowadays, with the listing rules, especially if you're going for listing rules requiring and stipulating tremendous amount of compliance, especially on information and equality of information. Many organizations are not really capable of keeping it confidential. They throw it away. I mean, they throw it around, and then they get into difficulty. We have seen quite a few investigations also recently by SEBI on this particular count alone, and some very large names were accused of not protecting their information enough. So we have to be very careful about this as to whether the enterprise itself is mature enough, along with its staff and all, to make sure that the insider trading, etc., are not done. So what are the values that also we need to evaluate, or beliefs of the organization, and these have to be regularly re-evaluated and adjust, especially beliefs, because like I said, some of the systems, some of the things keep changing. So unleashing itself is a milestone in the long life of an enterprise. DuPont, I just give an example, and the journey and destination should be exciting. End of the day, money is made for all stakeholders, but if the organization earns money because of its value and value system, not just because of some heritage or something. I think with that we can conclude. Thank you very much, and we'll be happy to take questions.
So if there are more, there are questions, Mishra ji. Question नहीं है.
My wife will endorse what I said.
नहीं है मैडम.
Yes, to her 5 times. If she can understand.
Okay. So, Renuka, are you there?
Yes, yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yes, thank you so much, sir. Yes,
But-
Madam, I'm audible?
Yes,
Yeah.
you are audible, but we can't see you.
Yeah. Yeah, some problem is there from my mobile. So I'm very thankful to Asit Mehta, sir. I'm sure various methods guided by Mehta, sir, will be helpful to stakeholders to unleash the potential energy, the enterprise value. And I, on behalf of WRC, would like to express my sincere thanks to CA Asit Mehta for giving an excellent coverage to the topic. And I also take opportunity to thank you all the attendees for giving such an overwhelming response for the today's meet. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Asit Bhai, for sharing your knowledge and your wisdom and your experience with all of us. We are highly enriched, and thank you for supporting the institute.
Pleasure, Dusty. Thank you so much. Take care and be safe, all of you.
charging